Want to get better at developing leaders in your church?
We're talking about that today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and I am joined by...
Hey, I get to say my own name. I'm AJ.
We are here in Tennessee together. We have been filming brand new Leadership Pipeline Design training videos. As you may know, we travel all around the world actually teaching churches about how to build a healthy leadership structure and leadership processes in something that we call Leadership Pipeline Design. And much like our strategic envisioning videos, which actually people may not know this, but we have all that training is also been filmed. Mm-hmm. We didn't have these leadership development training videos filmed. And so we've gotten together this week. We said, it's time, let's do it. Let's get these Leadership Pipeline Design training videos filmed. And so we get to be together in person. And that's kind of fun.
Yeah, so why not do a podcast together too?
That's right. So if you're just listening and you go, wow, your voices sound a little bit different, microphones sound a little bit different than normal, that would be why. If you're on YouTube, you actually get to see our wonderful faces today together, sitting next to one another here in front of a screen that says Leadership Pipeline Design. Shameless plug for that. But since we've been filming and talking about Leadership Pipeline Design this week, we thought, let's talk about Leadership Pipeline Design on the podcast.
Yeah, it's on the brain. Let's keep going with it.
That's right. We haven't talked about it enough this week here as we've been filming. We want to talk about it some more. So the topic today is, how can we build a healthy leadership development process? This is something that we fully explained in the Leadership Pipeline Design, but we thought we would give a little teaser of it and kind of hit some of the high notes on the steps of a good leadership development process. So there's 3 key steps to having a leadership development process in your church, and we're going to just touch on each one briefly.
Yeah, that's right. So there's, as Scott said, there's 3 elements to it, and we can also visualize this in sort of a circular pattern. These 3 things come back around continuously in your church when you're functioning well in how you're developing leaders. And so these 3 elements are assess, train, and launch. Assess, train, and launch. And these happen, as I said, continuously. So we're going to kick it off with the assessment piece.
Yeah, assessing leaders is really, really important because you got to know the difference between a leader and a non-leader. In our pipeline process, we define this by having core competencies for leadership. But even if you set those standards up for leadership, you're not going to know if someone is actually living out those standards unless you assess them. So we have to have key assessment practices in place in order to make sure that the people that we are installing in different leadership positions are actually qualified to serve there. I think it's called the Peter Principle, right? Where we have a tendency to elevate people to the level of their incompetence. So people tend to just keep getting promoted until they get to a point where they've been promoted to something they're actually not capable, they're not qualified to do. We see this sometimes, I think, in the government, both sides of the aisle. We're like, how did this person get this position? It's the Peter Principle in action, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to have that in your church. You don't want to elevate someone to the level of their incompetence. You want to have good assessment processes in place to make sure that the people you are putting in places actually are qualified and able to live out that.
Yeah.
The stakes are too high.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Proactive, good promotion elements in the church. Yeah. Assessing what, and now I think you just did say this, but the qualities of these people, their character qualities, their capacity for the position is pre-established. So we're not on the fly trying to figure out if we can shoehorn somebody into a job. We've predetermined the right person for the right position, and now we're measuring them against that to see if they'll be there. That doesn't mean that we don't train people up, and we'll get to that in a moment, but they need to be pretty much ready to roll into this next level. The training for it really should have happened already ahead of time.
Yeah, so that's a really great point about having, we're not deciding in the moment what the standard is for the assessment. We want to have already defined that. We talk about this in the leadership pipeline training as trying to bring some objectivity to something that is otherwise completely subjective. And when you look around at your church, if you go, wow, this person is in this position because they've been here for 20 years, having some longevity, I'm not saying that counts for nothing, but that doesn't count for everything either. Or, hey, they're a good guy. Or even their character is really good. Well, just because their character is really good doesn't mean they're necessarily a very good leader. And just because someone is really good at getting stuff done, if their character isn't there, that doesn't mean you should elevate them either. So there's a lot of complexities to this, a lot of nuance, and you really want to have thought through all these things. And you want to be sure, to kind of summarize and put a bow on this point, that you have a process or a policy or a procedure for assessing how are you going to assess leaders in your church. We talk about that in detail in the leadership pipeline process. This is not I guess it is a promo in some ways, but we just don't have the time to get into the details of all of that here on the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, we still just want to
trying to hide the football from
we just want to give you a brief overview and just introduce you to 3 core elements of healthy leadership structure in the church. So
it starts with assessment.
That starts with assessment. So moving on, our second piece in this continual process is training. And maybe, I don't know, you might even, hopefully by the end, you'll see how these things fit together and that the order is right. Sometimes it feels like, well, shouldn't we be like training should be the first thing we do?
Right.
And well, since it's continual process, it still has its place before and after other things.
Yeah,
so,
right.
But having training planned out in the church is really important as well. A lot of times what we see is somebody, maybe they're assessed somewhere, a deficiency is found, and then and only then do they get training that they might need. We just assume maybe they knew how to do something ahead of time. Training should be a continual process for us, much like our own personal sanctification as followers of Christ, where we're always improving, always seeking a greater holiness as our end goal. Training each other, iron sharpening iron, other people that have gone before you, training you up, is a continual process to make you perform better in whatever position you're in. It's only ever supposed to be a positive thing. Unfortunately, we do have to cover some training issues when there's deficiencies in performance or results. But for the most part, if we're proactive in our training and we're designing a great training process that'll allow for continual improvement, then we're going to see higher performing people and with probably greater morale happening at the same time.
Yeah, we've actually talked about this on the podcast a couple of times. I think there's an episode called like how to improve team performance or something like that. You can search for it. So we've talked a little bit about this, but there are some misnomers about training and some key mistakes that churches often make as it relates to training. So some of the least effective ways to train people are the things that churches do the most commonly. So, for example, trying to inspire someone, like to really motivate them and say, hey, you can do this. I believe in you. This is something that, especially as pastors, we like to do this because we think that we're really great at it. Like, I'm really good at an inspirational talk. It's the old Chris Farley, van down by the river, right? Like wasn't motivating the kids in that SNL skit, and it's not motivating people in your church either. So trying to simply inspire people into action is not the most effective way to train them up. Also, getting people together in a room and just sitting them down and blasting them with information. There are instances where that's the right approach, particularly as it relates to onboarding someone who's new to something, or if the whole church is new to a topic, it might be the right way to go. But as a general rule, that's not the most effective way at boosting people's performance. So there are other things that you could be doing that are more effective, which we go into detail on in the leadership pipeline process. But they are things like, again, we're not trying to hide anything from you or not tell you, again, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but these are things like giving good incentives, things like building really helpful tools that help people succeed. These are things like giving good, clear expectations and communication to people and coaching them up. So there are ways to do training that work really well. There are ways to do training that work less well. And so be thinking about that in your church as you're training leaders. Are we using the avenues or the venues for boosting our team that work, or things that are not working? And you can really tell that just based on how well your church is performing.
Yeah.
We set goals and we don't accomplish them. that's usually an evidence of training failure.
Yeah, I want to hone in for a moment on one element that you just talked about, and that was like having clear expectations, job descriptions, job functions noted, because this is one of the areas that when people are left like in this ambiguous state, what is my job and what makes it turn out well? How will I be assessed later if I don't know really what is the game that we're playing here? Then that's a really key piece, prior to the whole assess, train, launch process that has got to be put in place. And we have dealt, unfortunately, with some teams at churches, some staff level teams that they were very, very frustrated. And they submit comments back to us or have private conversations about really not knowing who in the world their boss is, what their role really is. And that's a challenging work environment or team environment, volunteer environment to have anybody perform well in. So that's a really important prerequisite, is to have very clear expectations, qualifications, and results expected from any position in the church.
Yeah. Okay, so we've kind of addressed briefly the idea of assessing leaders. We've talked about how the next step then is to train your leaders up. And then the third step, AJ, is to launch leaders. So what we mean by the term launching leaders is getting the right people in the right place, doing the right things. And I maybe would add doing it the right way. That's right helpful. People in the right place, doing the right things the right way. And you want to kind of get people plugged into the right spot. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to get into there's 4 R's, there's, reaffirm, redeploy, replace. We don't need to get into all that right now. I want to hone in on maybe 2 specific things. The redeploy aspect. Mm-hmm. So sometimes launching a leader, by the way, is just keeping them right where they're at. Mm-hmm. There's no change. But sometimes we need to move leaders. So maybe let's talk about the 2 key instances where we might be moving a leader.
Yeah.
So the first one would be, and I'll let you talk about this, is moving them from one ministry area to a different ministry area. Mm-hmm. So they're in children's ministry, and then they're moving to student ministry, and it's more of a lateral move in terms of responsibility. So why would someone make that kind of a shift? What would be some of the reasons that might lead to that? Yeah,
so I guess a key piece that you need to understand about launching leaders is that we would first have a really great understanding about who this individual is. Mm-hmm. We love to use the term divine design and how God has designed people. If you're familiar with the Rick Warren's shape concept, then these are all the elements of divine design and spiritual gifts and natural talents and abilities and experience and passion. And so those elements over time actually can have some shift happen to them. People might be really designed well for a particular area of ministry, but over time, as they gain experience in that ministry, as they have other events happen to them in life, their passions may actually shift. They gain skills. And so, maybe somebody that was excelling really in one area in the church, maybe they begin to get pulled into another area, or
maybe their understanding of themselves shifts.
Yeah.
They're like, I thought I liked this.
Yeah, right.
I thought I liked kids, and then I realized I just like my own. And no one else's, or whatever.
I might be able to relate.
Yeah. So it may not be that your divine design even shifted.
Yeah.
Maybe it did, but it might just be your understanding of it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So that's one area of redeployment in the church that we might see when we're launching someone into ministry. Redeployment is a component of launching somebody. They might have been previously launched somewhere and they're getting redeployed or relaunched somewhere else. So that's the first one, is moving from one ministry to another.
Yeah, before we move on from that, I want to just interject and say that, we have seasons, I think, in things.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're called to a ministry for a season, and it's okay to make a move and go.
Yeah.
I think God's calling me to do this different thing. And it's really important, I think, to be in tune with that calling, because people are going to serve for the long term if they are connected to something that they feel called to. And so if you're seeing a high degree of turnover in your church or people not wanting to step up and volunteer, it's probably because there's a general malaise in the church and there's not a culture within the church where you say, hey, we're not trying to find you and get you to help us do our thing. Like, we're not trying to just recruit you to fill holes for us. And instead, we're trying to launch you into the ministry that God is calling you to.
Wow, yeah, what a great perspective.
And so I think when you can make that, it feels like a distinction without a difference, but it's not. It's really important.
Yeah.
When you can say, no, we're about trying to launch you into the ministry that God has called you to, even if it's just for a season, and maybe we need to make a change later. This, I think, is really important. If you can create that culture and attitude and expectation in your church, it can shift the feeling and increase your ability to recruit volunteers and to have them stick long term.
Man, I love that. You know, that there's a faith element back to God in this. I think for, maybe the upper level leaders in the church in general, to take that attitude, we have to trust that God is sovereign in all things, including the people. And he says this explicitly in Acts chapter 17, verse 26, that he places people in the time and in the place that he wants them to be, including as a member of your church. And so if we truly trust that, if we believe that God is sovereign in that, then he has given you the people that he needs. And, if you're seeking him in that, then hopefully you can get pretty close to getting everybody into the right seat at the right time. But that's such a great attitude to have in, like, how did God make you? What is unique about you? And how are you made sovereignly capable to function in the body of Christ? And then we want to help make sure that you get there and have all the tools you need to succeed there.
Yeah. I mean, if they feel like they're doing you a favor, then they're going to feel a lot like, when I get tired, I'm like, you know what? I mean, I'm helping you out.
Yeah.
Versus if someone goes, man, this is, and they shouldn't just feel this way. It should actually be this way, where people feel like, no, this is enriching me. That as I'm building up the church, I am myself being built up and equipped and empowered and made whole and transformed. They ought to feel this way. So you can, by launching leaders the right way, it's not inconsequential. I know that this one actually feels like the easy thing, but you should not skip over this. Okay, so one is to move people from one volunteer position to another, maybe because their understanding has shifted, or their calling has shifted. And the second way that we might launch a leader is from one level of leadership to the next.
Yeah.
We're not going into all the levels of leadership in this podcast today, but let's talk briefly about, when would we move someone from, say, they're a small group leader in children's ministry to now maybe we're putting them in a position as a volunteer of coordinating an area within our children's ministry.
Yeah.
When would we do that, or why would we do that?
Yeah, well, when we would do that would be after we have assessed them in this present position and determined that they are reflecting back to us the character and capacity for that next level position. So then and only then would they be a candidate to move up to that next position. So we're witnessing things about them, and we're objectively, as much as possible, evaluating them against a preset set of criteria. And we're like, you know what? Yeah, I think Janet would be awesome to move into this other role.
Yeah, that's really good. And also because she wants to.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful, since we just were harping on that.
So not every person, this is actually, I think, really important to me. Not every highly qualified, capable, competent leader in your church has to be elevated to higher and higher levels of leadership in the church. It's perfectly fine. What an amazing problem it would be to have so many highly qualified leaders that you didn't even have the positions to elevate all the people who wanted to, much less were qualified for. That's actually what you want to be building towards, is where you've got these like really capable, qualified leaders overflowing to abundance to the point that you could send them out. We've had some discussions with some international churches and talked about these pipeline trainings. And one of the challenges in the international church is that people stay for a short period of time and then they maybe move on. Yeah. And rather than looking at that as a problem, look at it as an opportunity to be a blessing to the next church that they're going to be participating in.
Yeah.
Can I grow this leader so that when they move on to their next place, the next city that they're living at, they can get plugged into a church and be a highly competent leader. Yeah.
I mean, picture again this circular thing happening of assess, train, launch, and internally it comes back around. But what if we hit the launch mode and they project out from this circular pattern within our church into their own ministry, into a church in another place. So what a great, again, attitude to have. A good friend of mine, another part of the world, is kind of in this situation, where lots of people came into his area, and he's a great equipper. And then because of COVID, the area really had a downturn. Lots of people left and went to, back to other cities. And he lamented this, and I did with him. But the thing to remember is that he had equipped them. He had them prepared to launch out. And then he started hearing stories about them in other ministry areas where they had gone back into other places. And what a blessing that is. And especially for God even to have let him know that. What an encouragement.
That's so cool. Sorry, as you were talking, I was listening to what you were saying, but I was also thinking.
That's all right. I zone out on you sometimes too.
Well, I do talk a lot. But I was thinking about, and I'm hesitant to disparage in any way the Church of Jerusalem early on. Okay.
They were pretty okay.
They were pretty great in some things. But one thing that I find interesting is that a lot of these sort of missionary type folks, especially that we see early on in the book of Acts, they're not coming from the Jerusalem church. They're coming from Antioch.
Oh.
They must have had some sort of a culture in Antioch. Barnabas comes from Antioch. Paul is sent out from Antioch. There must have been some sort of a culture there. I don't know enough. I'm not smart enough. Someone in the comments can let us know what was going on in Antioch, where there was a culture, maybe in the city or maybe in the church specifically, that was about releasing people and sending them out to the nations.
Yeah, great observation.
It's not the only, in fact, I would, and I'm like really commentating, like adding my own lens on this. But it seems like without the persecution of Stephen in the book of Acts, maybe everybody would have just kept huddling up there in Jerusalem. And the only reason why they went out at all was because persecution came and some crisis came that made them go.
Scatter.
It made them scatter. So like maybe be Antioch, like have that attitude that we're recruiting leaders, we're developing them, and then we're sending them out to the nation.
If there's something negative about Antioch that's not coming to mind for us right now, don't do that. Only do the good parts of Antioch.
Only do the good things, and definitely not the bad thing.
Thanks for tuning into the Deep Theology Podcast.
Some pastor is shaking his head right now and being like,
"What's wrong with you guys?
Idiots." Anyways, the point of that is launching leaders. It can happen in your church. It can also be outside your church. And then I think a great way to just put a capstone on this episode today is to reemphasize what you said at the beginning, which is this is a continual process. So if we've assessed and we've trained and we've launched leaders into the right spot, guess what? It's time to do it all again. We're going to continue to assess them, continue to build them up, and continue to send them out, whether that's within our church or out to the world. We're going to assess, train, launch leaders continually, because it's always leadership development season at the church.
Oh, it is always leadership development season. There's a season for everything, and leadership development is a continual season.
Yeah, that you should be ready in season and out of season to continue to develop
There
leaders.
You go.
Yeah,
Love it.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us on the Church Revitalization Podcast. Guess what? We're a nonprofit organization. Actually, one of the reasons why we wanted to get this leadership pipeline design training filmed is because we have churches all over the world who are asking for this training, and we wanted to be able to give it to them. All of the work that we do for churches outside of the North America, we do for free, which requires donations from folks like you. It's also why we have to ask churches to pay domestically, because we need all those funds to be able to support the efforts that we do with churches internationally. So if you're a church that's worked with us in the past, know that you weren't just helping your church and you weren't just paying a consultant to come. You were actually supporting a ministry that has a global impact. So if you'd like to learn more about that and you'd like to participate in helping us help the global church get healthy, go to malforsgroup.com/donate. Become a partner with us today, and we would really appreciate that. We'll be back with you next week on the Church Revitalization Podcast.